Welcome, Ana, to the Beyond Barriers podcast. We are thrilled to have you on. I'm so excited personally because you have been a mentor of mine for many years, especially us working at Google, and thrilled to have you here to, share your story, because I know there's lots of listeners, our listeners and our audience who would love to hear your story and how, your journey to success. So without further ado, I don't want to take up any more time, but share us, who's Ana? Tell us your journey and how you, landed in, on the floors of Google and your successes.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much. It's great to see you again. We definitely miss you at Google, but so proud of you for what you're doing and, just this podcast and, your whole outreach to the community. It's really fantastic. And, really congratulations to you. So, and thank you for inviting me for sure.
Yes.
I would say for me, like things to know about me, I'm originally from Costa Rica. So, definitely English is my second language for sure. So if you hear that little accent, that's that's a little bit where it's from. I'm an engineer by training. So that's definitely something that shaped my career. And I would say that, it's funny when you look back at your career, there's these obvious trends that were happening, but they were maybe so effortless that you didn't notice them as trends because they were effortless. But for me, I think my love of product and, really creating and delivering things started really early, started when I was like 15 or 16. And I had a, tiny business where I sold scrunchies and, we talk about that deeply if there's interest. But, I think that should have been the key for me, that's what I wanted to do. But that's not what happened. I ended up doing, different roles, and I ended up doing my career as sort of a COO and, overall leader for that as a matter of subtraction. I tried new things. I didn't like them. So I just sort of narrowed until I realized, oh, I really love these, these type of roles. So I think that's been kind of like a bit of my journey in terms of, landing in the career choice that I did and really loving what I do. So.
That's fantastic. So you talked a little bit about how, you kind of narrowed it down, process of elimination of what you tried and what you didn't try. Can you share a little bit about, that takes courage, right? To try things and then realize that, okay, I don't like this. So you pivot. And sometimes we see where a lot of women will fall into the trap of, they'll start doing one thing and then they aren't deliberate. They aren't really taking the time to think about what's their next step. So share a little bit about how you gained that clarity and the courage to kind of try things, pivot things, and ultimately land where you landed.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say there were two sort of large phases for me. The first, and in both phases, there's one common thread. The common thread is that I love learning. And so I get super interested in any topic. Like you'll give me any topic I know anything about, and I'll be like, oh my God, I'm so excited about this. And I'll read about that. And then I'll double click on that. And I just click and click and click. It could be anything. It could be like my son got into Hamilton. So I read so much about his story and like the play and his other plays and his family, you could just go endless in the research. But that quest of learning was super important for me. And so early on, I ended up doing roles because I would start one job. I would do it for like a year to a year and a half. And then I would get interested in some other adjacent problem. And I was like, oh, what is Monica's role? What is, Susie's role? What is Joey's role? I'm going to go find out what those are. And I would try them out. And so it was this like quest for learning and making an impact and just super excited about that. So I was like the first phase where I would say learning was a big piece of it, but I just wasn't thoughtful about it. I just was like, oh, that seems interesting. I'll go over there. And that other thing seems interesting. And I'll go over there. And then along the lines, what happened, in my opinion, is I had done enough rotations that like management sort of noticed, and they're like, oh, she can do a lot of different things. Let's start moving her into management. Let's start moving her into like more roles. And so because I got that opportunity, then all of a sudden I realized, oh gosh, maybe I'm onto something. And I would say that's the second phase where it became purposeful. I tried new things even in my second phase, and I was still that quest for learning, but I was actually spending time, like mental energy units, thinking about what should the rotation be? Is rotation A or B better? If I do B, what's my +1 job from there? Whereas before, when I was young, my 20s, I was just kind of doing whatever seemed most fun. And so I think, you and I had talked about this when you were at Google, but this point that you have to spend time thinking about that. You have to be deliberate. Gosh, I really wish I would have known that way sooner. I just didn't get that tip from anybody. And I don't have any regrets, but I think I could have done so much better if I had just took an hour, went for a walk. I think a lot better when I'm walking, and had been more deliberate about that. So I think that's the second phase. Is at some point I did decide, hey, I think I want to be a COO. If I want to do that, what are the skills I need to get there? I have some, but I don't have others. And let me go get those experiences to really complement it so that I can be good at that job. And I can actually hopefully get a chance to become that, which, luckily for me, it did. But that after a certain point, it was definitely very deliberate. And, I spent not a lot, but definitely some time thinking about it more deliberately. And I would say I always feel like I do not leave enough white space to think. It's so easy to survive, just sort of survive the day. And especially when pandemic, you're so busy. It's hard to reflect back and say, how do I really want to, manage my time versus, calendar managing your time.
That's fantastic advice in terms of being deliberate and thinking about, what is it that you need to do next. Share a little bit about, because that's so important in that you gave yourself the time and the white space, whether it's taking a walk for an hour and really kind of thinking about what's next. And you identified the competencies or the things that you needed to acquire in order to become CEO, so COO, or whatever it is that you were aiming for. How did you then make those opportunities happen, right? Because they're not just going to fall in your lap. Like, what is it that you did, just methodically to make those things happen?
I mean, one of them for sure is that I go talk to other people who had the career that I thought I wanted. In one case, I sort of shadowed somebody for a day because I thought, oh, I think I want this, but do I really want that? And then, I realized that job is like super, super stressful. And so there was a point when after I shadowed, I was like, do I really want that? That seems like a lot. And then I realized, okay, but it's a lot of what I like. So I think I do want to go for it. And so in some cases, I literally just kind of cold called somebody and said, look, I really think I need to have experience with, salespeople. I grew up in a complete scientist household, right? Everybody there is an engineer or a doctor or a, science PhD. And so I didn't really know anybody. I didn't meet my first salesperson ever until I was 30. I mean, literally, it's funny to say that, but I really didn't. And so I knew that was like a big gap. And so I asked people I knew, mentors of mine or people I knew, like, hey, I think I really need a job that has front end experience. How do I do that? Can you connect me with somebody? You got to work it, right? You got to put effort to it. But I ended up getting those connections, and there was a role, and I applied for it, and I got it, and it was a huge experience for me because it was such a different culture than the one I grew up with. So you did part of that. Later in life, I would say it was more you just sort of knew, or you had. You knew people that were going to have the role. And so you would talk to them about your career and what you wanted to do, or people would approach you to try to understand, what you wanted to do. I think if you are passionate about what you do and you're contributing and you're really good, people will come to you, right? And they'll say, hey, like, do you want to be part of my team? And so those opportunities started to sprout out. So it was a combination, but there were definitely many cases in which I had to go figure it out. And, for me in particular, early in my career was the sales gap that I just didn't really understand that culture that well. That was definitely an interesting, my first job in that, it was super eye-opening. I just had no idea. Because I was the person who was like, oh, it's so hard to create the product, and it's so hard to design it. It's so hard to, develop it and then build it. And so like selling it is easy, right? Well, guess what? Totally not. But I had no idea. And so, it was very eye-opening for sure.
That's fantastic. And now I know during those times, I'm sure you had, you might have had some fears or limiting beliefs that kind of cropped up. How did you manage those? How did you manage to kind of keep those feelings in the, on the back seat?
Yeah. So look, everybody has that. I think everybody looks at careers and they're, oh, that person was like born a golden baby and they just like did everything perfect and their life was amazing. And like, I'm here to bust that, myth for sure. Everybody, I can't tell how many times I cried. You end up with scrapes, your hair is like messy from all the different things you've done. Nobody shows up looking amazing and like totally relaxed all the time. There's a lot of grit and a lot of, you really need to sort of want it, because there's going to be moments where you are, just besides yourself, or something unfair happened, or you're scared, or it's not a linear journey ever. And for me, there were so many of those moments. Some of the moments were early on when I wanted a role like in sales and I didn't really have the experience, and plenty of people told me no. And I was like, okay, well, next person on my, my list. Like, you were just sort of undeterred. That's part of it. You need to really want it and know about it. The second one is getting comfortable with the fact that you're going to be uncomfortable. And I know that sounds really trite, but it makes a huge difference, because you'll tell people like, look, you're going to make this change. You're going to feel uncomfortable. I just had this conversation with somebody. They go day one. They're like, I'm so uncomfortable. I'm like, we talked about this. Like, it's not a great feeling. And they're like, no, but I feel like I'm going to fail. I'm like, I know. You probably won't. You might, but you probably won't. And like, what's the worst thing that can happen if you do? But they just have that feeling, and you feel it in your body, and it's just awful. And so you have to be okay with like, I know that's going to happen. It's like getting a cold. I know that's going to happen, but like, I'll be fine afterwards. And you have to believe that you're going to be fine afterwards. One time I remember, for me, there was like a particular job, long story that I will try to summarize, but I felt, really uncomfortable. I was crying. I have an older sister who's been a great influence and just a wonderful sister to me. And she came to me and she's like, look, like, I know this is tough. I'm not telling you it's not a tough situation, but like, really, what's the worst that can happen? And I had my daughter like about a year and a half before. She's like, it's not like they're going to come take your baby away from you. Like, really, like, what really truly is the worst that could happen? And I had never thought about it that way. I had never thought about like, okay, what is the worst that could happen? And so I thought about that. I'm like, the worst that can happen is just really not that bad. So like, why am I so stressed out? And I think for me, I just wasn't comfortable being uncomfortable. So I think there's that one. And the third, and this is true, you've got to fake it till you make it sometimes. You're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have imposter syndrome. There was, I definitely I had one meeting where I absolutely 100% had imposter syndrome. I tried to get myself uninvited. I was not successful. I had to go to the meeting. And it went great, but I was so nervous. And I remember, a good friend and mentor of mine, he's like, look, you got to just go in there, pretend you belong if you don't think you do, and just do it and like fake it till you make it. And I was like, okay. But I did it and it worked out great. So it's a combination of techniques, but none of them are comfortable. And so if you're sitting there always like, perfectly poised, perfectly, just like everything's going great, your days always go great, like you're probably not pushing yourself hard enough, because there's definitely going to be falling off the bicycle, getting a scrape, getting up, dusting yourself off. There's a lot of that. You have to do that.
No, that's fantastic and so tangible. I love the 3 steps, because I think, like you said, of really kind of just pushing forward, but it's the whole the assessment that you did of like, what's the worst that can happen, and actually putting like a number to that and saying it's not that bad. What's the upside? What's the downside? I can live with the downside, so I'm going to keep moving forward. That's fantastic.
And I was really sad at that moment. Like, I was really scared, I think is the word I would use. And leave it to your awesome older sister to come tell you, like, it's okay. I've seen this movie before. It's going to be okay. And like, even if I'm wrong, like the worst is not that bad. And that really took the fear out of it for me. I was like, you know what? Totally. And it changes how you show up, right? Because you're like no longer fearful. So you show up fearless. And there's a lot to be said about that. You gotta believe, right?
Absolutely. Now, tell me a little bit about, where I see a lot of women struggle is like you said, being intentional, identifying what it is that you want and creating those opportunities. But then the whole idea around personal brand and self-promotion and being able to articulate your story, I see a lot of women getting tripped up there. What's your advice there? And how did you approach the idea around kind of elevating your, or bringing some visibility around you and what you wanted to accomplish?
Yeah, that's a great question. And honestly, I'll be honest, I think this is one of the areas that for me is probably like been a gap, and I think it will continue to be.
Uh-huh.
Um, I I remember the first time somebody told me, "What is your brand and what do you represent, and how are you getting your message out there?" And I just could not even understand the question. I just thought it
Mhm.
was so weird because I got there, I worked hard, I was just focused on my work and sort of let my work speak for myself.
Mhm.
I didn't even think about it. It wasn't even really a concept. Um, and as I grew up in sort of my career, it became a discussion. And for me, like it's super important that it be genuine. Like I
Mhm.
know there are some people.
Yes.
I just told you I'm from like a STEM family. Probably, there's probably much better people that are like better at sales, better marketing. That's just not who I am. That's not what I grew up with. And
Mhm.
so for me, the fact that I even had to have a narrative was something really odd. The way that it became possible for me is I was just really genuine because I really wanted to, like, that's super important for me, how it comes across.
Mhm.
And I am who I am. And so if I want to change something to develop, which all of us are a product of development forever, right? Like we're
Right.
never finished ever, like ever. And so I realized that for me, it may take longer to get the change because it has to be super genuine. That's one area where I can't really sort of fake it till you make it. But
Mhm.
I do think it's really important for you to understand to yourself. Forget what anybody else says. Forget what you show outside. Like with yourself, have that conversation of saying, what matters to me? What are my values?
Mhm.
What do I think I contribute? What do you think I can learn? And so once you understand it better for yourself,
Mhm.
and like literally that's a conversation just with yourself, then how you project it really matters and it becomes really consistent. Because here's the thing that you need to know. Even if you're an engineer, even you're like me, nerdy, like didn't even think about this. If you don't have the narrative out there, there's going to be a narrative about you. It's not
Mm.
like it's going to be empty. It's
Right.
just not going to be something. So either you engage in it or somebody else will decide it for you, but it's
Right.
not going to be missing. And you don't want other people to say who you are. You want to say who you are and what you represent. And so to me, when I started to realize that, oh
Mhm.
gosh, there's this conversation or narrative that's developing, and
Mhm.
and I've never even paid attention to it. And do I agree with it? Do I not? Like, forget that. If I want a narrative about me, I want to make sure I know what that is.
Right.
And I want to make sure I care deeply because, it's something that you've had for your whole career. And so I think this was a big, slow evolution for me on how I got comfortable with that.
Mhm.
Um, but it's super important because, again, it's not like it's going to be absent. Like if that was a choice, fine, don't play that. But that's not what's going to happen. It's going to
Right.
be there. So you better care and you better pay attention. You better be intentional and super genuine about what it is that you want out there and who you want to be.
That is
So
so
that's how I think
insightful.
of it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's what's so powerful. What you just said is that, if you aren't going to tell your story, someone else is going to tell it for you. So you may as
Yes.
well write that
Yes.
story so that you have some control over what is being
Yes.
said about you. That is
Yes.
that is brilliant.
And
Now,
and the other thing that I think about it, when you're in a project and you're like, okay, we're doing this really complicated project. So like let's write down what our North Star is. Like what are
mhm,
the three things that we care deeply about with respect to this project? I feel like this narrative and brand is sort of the same thing. Like
mhm,
you need to have your North Star because there's going to be plenty of times where you get to a crossroad and there's like option A, B, or C. And if you're not consistent about your North Star, you have no criteria by which to make a selection. And
mhm,
so you end up in like this like non homo, like you just not well thought out
right.
options that just happen versus you saying like these are the things that really matter to me. And
Mhm,
so therefore when I think about choices and the longer you work and the more you contribute, you'll have more and more options. And so you really need to, in my opinion, have that sort of guiding star, North Star,
mhm,
very clear so that all options can be vetted against that. And that's how that brand becomes consistent because there's a North Star to it.
right.
Otherwise, you could have a brand, circa 2020 and, another brand in circa 2025, which was totally different from the 2015 version. Like, it's, you really want more consistency in that.
Exactly. If you don't have clarity of where you want to go, then how are you going to get there if you don't know
Right,
exactly
right,
what direction to
right.
head?
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So we talked a little bit about, like, you are in this industry and in this world, like technology is so disruptive. It's everything's changing. You're shipping every day. How does Ana, like, how do you make sure that you are, being successful? Like, what are your daily habits and rituals? So what is the day in the life of Ana like to keep sane and keep moving forward?
They've changed a lot, I would say, for sure, over time. So they're not,
Hmm.
static. But I would say, especially because of the pandemic, talk about everything changing, right? And
Yes.
and you've seen the statistics of how many women,
Hmm.
really have left the workforce. And look, I can understand why, because all of a sudden you're at home, you have your kids here, so you're the teacher and you're cleaning and you're cooking and you're doing your work, and just everything became sort of one thing. Um, for me, the journey in terms like of habits that mattered to me started very early. It started when I had my daughter, actually,
Hmm.
because before, I'll be honest with you, I just like love work. I was working a lot. My husband and I got married really young, and we didn't have kids intentionally until later. So we just had all this empty time that we could do really fun things. It just wasn't a choice, I mean, you could
Right.
fit it all. But then once I had my daughter, it made it super clear to me what my priorities are. So I think, knowing what those are is super important. So like for me, spending time with my family.
Hmm.
I'm Latin, family's
Oh,
everything,
yes.
especially for my kids.
Uh-huh.
And so, for example, I took a year off with each of my kids, which in tech, especially for a female, is like unheard of, right? Because you
Right.
feel like you have to reboot your entire career. But that was really important to me. And that's one of those conversations. I was really afraid to do that. By the way, most people don't remember I ever did it. And it mattered zero. And I got promoted both times because I think they miss me so much. So great decision. But at that moment, it was really scary. So I think time with my family is something super important to me, and flexibility to be able to do that. The second for me, this is going to sound like a commercial, but it's just true. I happened to get a Fitbit device like this one, right? Like
Yeah.
in January of 2020, because we were working on that, with that acquisition. And
Hmm.
I realized, oh my gosh, when I am working, I am literally barely moving. That is crazy. Even though I did dancing on the side, and even though I would
Hmm.
do exercises on a regular work day, I just would move like literally almost nothing. And so I started to change that to get to that, elusive 10,000 steps every day. And
Yes.
boom, the COVID pandemic started. And so through this whole time, I've really been like diligent about that. And so I go for walks all the time, whether it's one-on-ones or like every day. I don't miss it ever. And doing walking one-on-ones is something that has kept me sane for sure. And the third one is finding that quiet space. When I start
Mm.
feeling like overwhelmed, there's just like too much and you're just surviving, I now recognize like the feeling in my body.
Hmm.
I will just like cancel a few meetings or take a day off, or just like have time to reflect and sort of, you know,
Hmm.
relax, if you will. Um, and then doing fun things I enjoy, like whether that's swimming or baking, those are like two favorites. Thankfully, they go together. Otherwise, it would be a really bad equation because baking could win out.
Yes.
But some of those things that just bring me joy and are really relaxing to me. Gardening is another one. I like to garden a lot.
Hmm.
Um, so all of these, if you notice, are very peaceful. Like in the water, you can't have a phone. You're not really going to be gardening having a phone. You can't really do it when you're baking. So distance away from my devices and
Hmm.
activities that I really can't multitask on are things that make me excessively happy and bring me back into balance. So those are some of the things I do to try to stay sane.
Those are so important. And I love how you said it's activities that keep you away from your devices so that you actually can get some of that white space. Because when you're doing those things, you do
Yes.
kind of ruminate and think about all the things that, you are doing in life, right? And how they all align. So I think that's
I know
fantastic.
this is super weird, but I feel like gardening makes me like a better leader, because you're
Really?
just
Yeah.
thinking. And
Uh-huh.
it's like, it's so peaceful, it's so easy, you're just there, it's beautiful, it's,
Hmm.
sunny, like windy. You're, making your garden really nice, but you're
Yeah.
just sort of also thinking. I swear, I think it's made me a really good leader. I guess one other thing I forgot too is you have
Hmm.
to say no a lot. Like you
Mm.
have to say no to things. And so, we're doing this podcast today, but, honestly, there's many other things that I get invited for that I would love to be able to support, but I'm just like,
Mhm.
I can't do
Yes.
all of them. Not even, I bet you I probably hit a 10% ratio of what I get asked to do or could participate in. And I would love to do most of them, but you just have to prioritize what you do. So for me, that saying no has become, an important skill set. And you always think, okay, I've said no so much, is probably at the top, but sure
Right.
enough, you end up having to develop even more and more, sort of conscious decisions around where you're going to spend your time or not. And it's hard, you don't want to disappoint people or be ungrateful, but at the end of the day, you just can't do it all. You got to say no.
Yeah, that's so important because, if you are a yes person, you keep saying yes, you actually are saying no to some things that you're not thinking about when you commit to
You're
something
exactly
and
right.
you're not thoughtful about it. So I
And
think being
usually that's
deliberate.
health related, right? You just
Yes,
run yourself into the ground. So,
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. So insightful. And so I wanted to touch on one last thing before we wrap up is that, the power of community. I think that is one thing that I've seen, women not leverage as much. And, as Latinas, as, we have these huge, networks, but we sometimes don't leverage them in the way that we should. How have you in the past used, um, influential relationships or built relationships where you felt comfortable to ask for the help that you need?
Yeah, honestly, I think that's been one of my secret sauces is that I
Mhm.
grew up with, an older sister and my mom who was a super accomplished person. So I felt like I had this built-in community. And, obviously they're both older than me, my mom, and so they would have this great advice that they would just share freely. And so I became very used to being able to say, hey, I'm thinking this, but I love running it against. I love talking to somebody about it. And you realize when you go through anything, right, that generally speaking, you can find people who have gone through that. And so, like my mentors, there's these two guys that have been super influential in my life, and they've seen so much and they have a different perspective, right?
Mhm.
And so they gave me such great advice, like, hey, go do this, go get a raise. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I can ask for that. That's really uncomfortable. They're like, here's how you're going to do it, and you're going
Right.
to do it Tuesday. And, there's all these people that have these experiences that you've gone through, that you're going through that or be so helpful. And now, interesting enough, I feel like also, like I have a 17-year-old daughter. And so I'll sit and talk to them, her and her friends, and you get all this insight
Mhm.
from, just younger people's point of view of the world. And also my father-in-law. So I feel like I have like this 3 generational thing going that really helps me out because they have different points of view and you just get all this data, and it helps. So I'm the opposite. I'm like, hey, I'm feeling this, let's talk about it. I definitely don't have any hesitation of asking for help or saying that I'm confused about something.
Mhm.
I really enjoy the discourse and I really enjoy that sense of community, and it's super Latin, right? Like, hey, let's all have cafecito and talk about
Yeah,
it. um,
absolutely.
so I think that's been a plus for me, frankly.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's so important. And I think what the underlying trend that I constantly hear from you is that the love of learning, like learning is your superpower. And, and leveraging all of those, tapping into the insights from all of those people is fantastic. And so in closing out, I mean, thinking about, how women can accelerate their success, especially in this disruptive digital age, and the art of learning, how do you make time, how do you make sure that you're constantly learning?
I think for me, I can feel when I have 1,000 balls in the air, and I know the level of discomfort that I'm comfortable with right now and
Hmm.
which one I'm not. But I also know, like, if I'm bored for 1 minute, that's a huge problem. Like, I reckon that's like the worst for me. So I think I've known myself better now, and I can recognize the signs in my body and in terms of my behavior. And so I can tell when I'm learning or not learning. And
Hmm.
I will just tell you one thing we didn't touch upon, but it's made a huge difference for me is, along the lines, I think my parents really challenged me to like contribute, right? They
Hmm.
used to say like, you're not here to consume oxygen, like you're here to do something and make it count while you're here. And
Hmm.
that really stuck with me. But as I got through my career, one of my mentors that we were talking about, he told me, he's like, I want you to think big. And I thought I was. I was like, what do you mean I'm not thinking big? He's like, no, really, let's have that conversation. What do you want to do? And I would describe what I thought was this really big aspiration. He's like, that's just really obvious to me that you're going to get there. Totally not obvious to me, but apparently super obvious to him.
Right.
He's like, what is the thing that you want to do that's not obvious? Like, what is that like really scary dream that you don't even want to say because you're embarrassed that I will quote you someday as saying that? And man, he pushed me so hard for like 4 meetings. I hadn't even really thought about it. So what I thought was big for me, in his mind, was not big enough. And he kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And after a while, I was like, oh my God, I really wasn't thinking as big as I could have. And I got to tell you, that's something I ask myself all the time. Like, am I really, aspiring big enough or big enough? And, I may not get to everything, but like, if I even get to half of that, that's amazing. You know what I mean? So I feel like this really push for like really dream big. And it sounds, again, may sound like big is easy. It's not. And it requires a lot of thought. It has made a huge difference in my career. And it's made a huge difference in my personal life as well, in terms of what opportunities I go to. And so I think for me, that's a big advice. Like, are you really thinking big? Are you really, or not? And I think you did, right? You left a super position to go do something amazing and huge and disruptive. And that takes courage. It takes courage to do that.
Well, thank you. And I think what you said is, so true. Is we think, it's like, put that dream out there and then scratch it out and think bigger and scratch it out. And you need to do it 3 or 4 times, like you said, to really kind of get to the point where it's this crazy, audacious goal that you are kind of like, can I even accomplish this?
Nobody saw my paper when I wrote it down. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, but that has helped you get to where you go, right? You're aiming for the stars and you land on the moon, and you never really thought you'd ever make it that far. I think it's fantastic.
I've definitely had a couple of those already where I was like, wow, for boards for me, where I never thought that would happen. And now I'm on a board that I can't believe I can do, and that I get the privilege of doing that. Honestly, never in a million years did I think I would get that. And I did, and it's amazing. And I probably wouldn't have even tried if I hadn't been pushed so far by my mentors. Made a huge difference.
Yeah. What I also love that I hear you saying over and over is you still have mentors. I mean, I think what happens with some people is they get to a certain point and they start mentoring other people, but they forget to seek out mentorship themselves. And it seems like this is a lifelong habit that you constantly have, and you are seeking out mentors that even don't look like you, right? So you're learning.
They mostly don't, actually. They mostly don't. And I think that's really helpful. I mean, definitely you should get some, if you can, that look like you, but I find the most disruptive advice is from people who really don't understand your fears at all, and they don't have them. And so they're just like, go for it. You're like, no, but like, they're like, oh, no, push yourself there. So they really don't look like me at all. And I would tell you, I definitely still have mentors. I probably talk to my mentor, like, I don't know, we ping or chat or talk like probably once a month easily. And, just recently I had an issue. I was really bothered by something, and I called him, and he like literally gave me this one-liner. He's perfect for one-liners, by the way. And in 10 seconds flat, essentially resolved my concern. I was like, wow, I could have spent weeks worried about that, but nope. 10 seconds. That's all it took.
That's fantastic. Well, Ana, thank you so much, because like you said earlier, you have so many requests all the time to participate in things, and you have to say no because there's so much on your plate. So we are absolutely honored, and thank you for the pearls of wisdom that you've shared. I know that our audience is going to, love listening to this episode, and they're going to learn so much from it. And we get asked all the time, how do we continue to follow Ana, and follow the things that you're doing? What's the best way if someone were to kind of want to follow you and get in contact with you? LinkedIn, what is it that how?
I don't know. That's a good question. I'm not super active in, in LinkedIn or in other ones, which I know, it goes back to you can't do it all.
Right.
Probably LinkedIn at this point would be my guess. But be aware. I don't check it all the time,
Yes.
but definitely more so than social media for sure.
Yeah.
So definitely that would be the easiest way. No, it's my privilege. I love working with you, and really thank you for inviting me. And super excited about what you're doing. And great to see you again. And wish you all the success. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ana.